So to continue with chapter 1, personal financial planning, the formal definition is it is a systematic process that considers important elements of an individual's financial affairs in order to fulfill financial goals. So that's sort of a mouthful. What we're hoping to do in this chapter, the place we're hoping to get to is where we can identify financial goals in the short, mid, and long term. So this is just a basic planning model. It's a feedback loop. It's used in all sorts of planning, but we're going to try and identify some financial plans. And then once we've done that, of course, we have to say, well, how am I going to get there? Those are your actions. Am I going to save more? Am I going to spend less? Am I going to start a 401k? Am I going to change my insurance? Am I going to obtain some credit? What am I going to do? And then what are the results from that? Are they the hoped for results? And if not, then I have to go back to the drawing board with the plans. This is a diagram of a 6-step financial planning process, and we're going to be working through this in the first 2 chapters. Again, identifying our financial goals. What is it that we want to attain in the next 12 months? The midterm, which is 1 to 6 years, and then 6+ years, which is our long term. And then we're going to develop strategies to do that. And we're going to implement them and then keep looking at them periodically, developing and monitoring them. Am I making progress? Am I saving as much as I want? Am I paying down my student loan debt, etc.? And we're going to learn how to use financial statements to ensure that we're working towards our goals. And then again in that feedback loop with number 6, do we need to redefine our goals and revisit anything? So I've already sort of alluded to this. These are examples of financial goals. I want to buy a house in the next 7 years. I want to pay off my student loans, or I want to build a college fund for my child. Something like achieving financial independence, that's a little bit vague. I would try and make your financial goals more concrete. And some people say, you know, I want to buy a bass guitar, or I want to, you know, buy and train a dog to hunt. I mean, they can be small or they can be grandiose, like paying off all my debt. So it's very individualized. So here's your dates again for short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And I'm going to be asking you to do that here in the first unit as one of your assignments. You're going to be actually identifying your short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals. And it's oftentimes pretty easy for us to talk about the short-term and not quite as easy as we move into 2 to 5 years. That feels, for many of you as students, that'll be a big shift in life. You'll be out of school, you'll be starting starting a career, you may be starting a family, etc. And then long-term gets even more difficult for many of us because just the further in the future, the more uncertainty. But I am going to be encouraging you to really try and think about some of these things and put them down on paper in the form of an assignment. And you'll be using worksheet 1.1, which I've replicated on Moodle for you, so you don't need to retype it. It's already on Moodle. This chart looks at our personal financial planning over our lives. So on the x-axis is the age, on the y-axis is your income. And probably no shock, most of you are probably in the 20 to 30 range, early 20s, you know, very low income, you're in school, you aren't really acquiring assets, you're certainly probably not worried too much about, you know, saving or insurance or tax planning because you're at the very beginning of the game. But you can see as you move through college and early family formation, of course, this is all just a snapshot of averages, you know, you may or may not be in this range at all, and career development, that your income, you know, raises pretty dramatically during your 20s and 30s, generally plateaus 40s and 50s, and as you're saving them for retirement, you move into pre-retirement, and then your income stream drops because, of course, you're not working. So this is just a great overview, and you can see how significantly your financial planning and your goal setting changes during that time period. So this is just discussing this idea of the time value of money. So the earlier that you start saving, an IRA is an individual retirement account, the better off you're going to be. So for example, just to illustrate this, if you don't start saving until you're 40 and you put away $2,000 a year in an individual retirement account that earns 5%, you will have $95,000 in 25 years when you retire. But if you start that exact same plan at age 30 rather than age 40, in other words, just add 10 years to it, it almost doubles the amount of money you'll have. And so that might be counterintuitive. How could it double the amount of money when I only added 10 years? But it's the compounding of money, meaning that as you earn interest, then that compounds and you start earning interest on your interest. So the takeaway from this is if you start saving in your 20s, even a really inconsequential amount of money like $50 a month or $100 a month, it will make a really significant difference when you get to retirement. And again, this illustrates that same concept. Well, actually, this is talking about the difference in the rates of return. So it's the same amount of money. Say I put away $1,000 today. And the lower line, the red line, is if I'm earning 4% a year rate of return or yield. And the top line is if I'm earning 6% rate of return or yield. And in 10 years, you can see the differential, 20, 30, and 40 years. So these two slides together should really hopefully drive home a basic concept, which is A, start early, and B, maximize your rate of return. And we'll talk a lot about, obviously, everyone wants to maximize their rate of return, but to get higher rates of return, you generally have to ingest more risk. And then this is just identifying some special planning concerns that might impact your financial goals. So managing two incomes, if you have a partner that you share household expenses and income streams with, most of us bring different attitudes and styles to the table, tolerance for risk. So you've kind of got to learn how to respect and work with each other's attitudes and set goals that merge those attitudes. It's a really key aspect of financial planning. Also, you'll be learning how to manage employee benefits in certain situations where you've got things like flexible benefits or an HSA, which is a health savings account, and learning how to work and coordinate all those different instruments. And then I also talked about managing finances in tough economic times where you need to have built a reserve or some sort of emergency fund that you can harvest in the case of job loss or health issues or, big asset acquisitions, things like that. So all very important. And then major life changes we've already discussed. So this is why I'm going to be stressing so much to have a reserve fund, because for a large percentage of Americans, something like a transmission going out, or if you own your house, your heating system going out, something like that. I mean, it can throw all the best laid plans completely into, chaos if you don't have a special fund built up. Some folks will use professional financial planners, so it's an outside person to help guide them. I'm guessing that most of you are at the beginning of learning how to establish financial goals and implement your plans. And so that's way overkill. But as you acquire assets and have more potential liability over the years, that may be something you want to do. And there's lots of different layers or types of financial planners. The next chart looks at the different certifications. And I honestly am not completely conversant with all of these. CFP, Certified Financial Planners, are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But if you're curious about any of these, they've got different URLs that you can go look at. And then also one of these last screens is just talking about, as we do our financial planning, it's not in a bubble. It's impacted by what's going on in the economy, what's going on in the markets, what administration is in power in government, the U.S. government, the international environment, and what sort of choices or demographics or products are consumers focusing on. So it's when you're creating your financial goals, it's happening really with a very large number of variables impacting it, and some of them, obviously many of them you don't have control over. So I hope that this gives you a good overview of where we're trying to go. And I would like you to read the chapter, think a little bit about what we've talked about, and move through the assignments. The last couple things I want to talk about is what determines your personal income. This is all very intuitive, obviously. What part of the country do you live in? How much education do you have? What kind of career do you choose? You can see here that this date is actually a couple years old, but you can see at the bottom here where education obviously has a huge payback. Many of you will be borrowing money for education, but you can see the differential in your annual income will quickly pay back the investment that you've made in your education. Okay, thank you very much, and hope that you have enjoyed the information in Chapter 1.